Thank you, everybody, for being here today. And we're going to go ahead and jump right into business. We have a hearing on House Bill 2106. I'm going to open that hearing and ask the revisor to give us, pass out some preemptive amendments that we'll be talking about when we actually work the bill. But I asked the conferees to talk about these changes during their testimony as well. Yeah. I believe the committee assistant also emailed this out to everybody, so you should also have this electronically in your inbox. Okay, it's in the S drive. Apologize. All right, now, Revisor Heim, tell us what we're looking at.
Mike Heim with the Revisor of Statutes Office. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2106 with the balloon, which I will run through very quickly. Current law provides every person who engages in any activity promoting or opposing the adoption or repeal of any provision of the Kansas Constitution and accepts money or property for the purpose of engaging in that type of activity shall make an annual report to the Secretary of State of individual contributions, contributions in kind in their aggregate amount in excess of $50 received during the preceding calendar year. The report shall show the name and address of each contributor and so on. The report is due on or before February the 15th. There's a preliminary report, if you flip over this current law. In addition to the annual report, the person engaging in any activity promoting the adoption or repeal of an amendment and so on is required to file a preliminary report within 15 days prior to each election, showing basically the same type of information. So the changes are that this expands this law considerably, and what it does is provide each person shall submit a report, shall certify that the person has not knowingly accepted contributions or expenditures from a foreign national, and that each donor named in the report is not a foreign national and has not knowingly accepted contributions or expenditures either directly or indirectly from a foreign national that's in aggregate exceeding $100,000 within a 4-year period preceding the donor contribution and so on. There's a definition of foreign national which is on page 1 of the bill and goes over to page 2. And then there's some additional language that is suggested as a new subsection, subsections B, C, and D. And that provides each person who accepts contributions and so on shall require each donor to certify that the donor is not a foreign national. Each person making an independent expenditure for any activity shall within 48 hours of making the expenditure certify to the commission, ethics commission, that the person has not knowingly accepted any money either directly or indirectly from a foreign national that in an aggregate exceeds $100,000 within a 4-year period and so on. No person, again, goes on, no person shall directly or indirectly accept any contribution or expenditure from a foreign national, and the Attorney General may prosecute any person who violates the subsection. In addition, civil action may be brought by the Commission or the Attorney General, and damages can be collected of not to exceed the amount of twice the amount of the prohibited expenditure. So it's a mouthful.
Are there any questions for the revisor? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. All right, we'll open proponent testimony, and the first conferee that I have listed is Frank LaRose on WebEx. Sir, are you with us?
I am, Chairman.
Awesome, thank you. Please proceed.
Well, good to see you again, Chairman Proctor, and to the rest of the members of the committee, Vice Chairman Wagner, Ranking Member Haskins. My name is Frank LaRose. I serve as the Ohio Secretary of State. Actually had the chance to talk with my good friend Scott Schwab, your Secretary of State, earlier today, and I know that there are several others that are there to testify on this, including Jason Sneed from the Honest Elections Project. I think Catherine also from Heritage Action. Looking forward to talking to you about really what we did here in Ohio to fight off these efforts by wealthy foreign activists to try to, in this case specifically, buy their way into the Ohio Constitution. Of course, as elected officials, we're responsible for upholding our government documents, including our Constitution. And anytime a foreign national is trying to influence that process, that's rightfully concerning to all of us. We found a loophole in Ohio law that had been weaponized by political activists that really were managing to indirectly funnel hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign national money into ballot issues in the state in order to attempt to enshrine radical ideology into our state constitution. The most frequent actor, and of course it's not limited to him, others would be able to weaponize this as well, is a Swiss billionaire activist named Hans-Georg Wyss. He's donated hundreds of millions of dollars to a network of dark money groups all throughout the country, which in turn funnel millions of dollars into Ohio ballot campaigns and into other states as well. Although this billionaire is prohibited from donating directly to candidates or political committees, the Associated Press reports that his influence is still broadly felt through millions of dollars that are routed through a network of nonprofit groups. I call it political money laundering. It's a way of moving money around so that it becomes very difficult to trace. The New York Post adds that Wyss has become widely known for funneling dark money, what they call a dark money revolving door, and has effectively bypassed campaign finance restrictions which bar non-citizens from meddling in American elections. Some have described his activities as creating Swiss cheese out of the election laws. Wyss's influence in Ohio even goes beyond financing ballot interests. The New York Times reports that he created a political foundation which is intended to shape media coverage and help Democratic causes. Through this sort of partisan dark money effort, Hans-Georg Wyss has helped create an entity of pseudo-news publications under the umbrella of a left-leaning nonprofit entity known as the state's newsrooms. In Ohio, they operate a thing called the Ohio Capital Journal that passes itself off as real news. And what they do is provide this content free of charge to little hometown newspapers that in many cases are looking for that content. They print it. They don't even realize essentially that what they're doing is being used by a propaganda operation. It's something to be alert to because it could be occurring in your state as well. Of course, the vast majority of the work of this fake news operation is targeted to try to attack Republican office holders and conservative causes. I raised this issue to demonstrate the extent of these foreign nationals' reach into Ohio through their dark money operations. And again, they've spent millions, really hundreds of millions to support liberal causes in swing states and all throughout the country. The scope and sophistication of this scheme led me to work with our members of the General Assembly to pass legislation that would close the foreign influence loophole. This demonstrating the significance of this threat, our legislation became House Bill 1, which was enacted in a special legislative session last summer that was called by the governor to show you how intent they were to try to bypass our state legislative prohibitions. And it's hardly coincidental that the very day the governor called that special session, this group transferred nearly $7 million into a committee that was advancing a redistricting amendment in our state, trying to change the way the district lines are drawn. The fact that they hurried up to dump this $7 million into that cause right before our state legislature was called into a special session to prohibit foreign influence of our elections, again, shows you how intent they are on trying to do this. After the legislature enacted what we called House Bill 1 and the governor signed it into law, the beneficiaries of this foreign influence immediately sued to try to stop me from enforcing it. And of course, we engaged in action to fight back against that. Thankfully, we were able to be successful in fighting against that litigation that they brought, and just reaffirm that American elections are only for American citizens. Enacting our legislation was a great first step in Ohio, but this is really about enforcement. Enforcing these provisions can be very difficult. Again, billionaire foreign nationals and their political allies will do their best to flaunt the laws and launder dollars through various accounts. They can afford a lot of sophisticated operatives and lawyers, and so they will attempt to mask the sources of this money and try to find ways to move it around. So again, putting this prohibition in place that you guys are considering right now is vitally important, and I encourage you all to pass it. But making sure that the right enforcement mechanisms are in place is also vitally important, because the bad guys are going to try really hard to circumvent your effort. Now, we work hard at the Secretary of State's office. I'm responsible in Ohio for investigating campaign finance irregularities, and so we work to investigate their schemes. Ohio has empowered me and the Ohio Attorney General to work to investigate and prosecute these activities. Of course, the prosecution occurs at the Attorney General's office. But this dark money is often dark for a reason, and it's the campaign finance system that can be exploited by these kind of complex transactions that really create a nefarious money trail. And again, I applaud you all for taking this on. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, I applaud you all for working on this important legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Are there any questions for Secretary LaRose? Representative Williams.
Mr. Chair, so thank you for joining us on WebEx today. So my question really is about those companies such as AMC or Smithfield Foods or GE Appliances that are majority owned by the Chinese Communist Party. So in this bill, it actually says that any contributions or expenditures that such entity makes, if it's derived from their funds in the U.S., then they can make that contribution. I think it would be very, very difficult to enforce in such, instances as this. What do you do when you have major corporations in the United States that are now predominantly owned by China? How do you even manage that? Thank you.
Well, thank you. And this is the pernicious nature of state-owned enterprises to begin with, right? And that's a larger topic of conversation about whether state-owned enterprises that are operated by the CCP should even be allowed to do business in the United States. Again, separate topic for a separate day. But as it relates to their political activity, if they have a PAC, if they're attempting to influence American elections by supporting an issue campaign, a constitutional amendment, a candidate, I am fully supportive of prohibiting PAC money that comes from an entity that's foreign controlled, for the same reason that we don't want a Swiss billionaire being able to funnel money into a campaign in Ohio. Again, to the extent that the legislation in front of you does that, I would applaud you to make sure that those loopholes are fully closed.
Are there any other questions for Secretary LaRose? All right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you all. Take care.
Okay. Our next conferee is Caitlin Sutherland. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Chairman Proctor, members of the committee, my name is Caitlin Sutherland, and I'm the founding executive director of Americans for Public Trust, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to uncover and publicize outside money and influence in politics and policy, including tracing foreign dark money. I thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 2106, which prohibits foreign nationals from contributing to state ballot issue campaigns. HB 2106 is a vital and crucial step to ensure Kansas politics are free from foreign meddling. Kansans should have every confidence that their elections are free from foreign influence and interference. But despite a federal ban on foreign nationals influencing elections, they can still exploit loopholes on the state and the federal level that allow foreign money to flow into important policy fights and electoral tools. Currently, there is no federal or Kansas prohibition on foreign nationals contributing to organizations that spend on ballot measures. Without these safeguards in place, how does this money flow? Well, as Secretary LaRose just testified, a significant source of foreign cash is flowing into politics from a Swiss billionaire named Hans-Jörg Wyss, who is not a U.S. citizen, but whose goal is to, quote, reinterpret the American Constitution in light of progressive politics, end quote. According to the New York Times, Mr. Wyss's, quote, political activism is channeled through a daisy chain of opaque organizations that mask the ultimate recipients of his money, end quote. Through a detailed accounting of publicly available records, APT has been able to trace that at least $250 million of this foreign money has been funneled into a Washington, D.C.-based group called the 1630 Fund. In the absence of laws restricting foreign nationals from contributing to ballot issue campaigns, 1630 Fund has received around $250 million from this foreign national and turned around and poured $130 million into ballot issue campaigns in 25 states. This foreign-backed money has come into Kansas and will continue to come if HB 2106 is not passed. In 2022, 1630 Fund was the #1 donor to Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, an organization that was formed to oppose a legislatively referred amendment to protect life in Kansas. That amendment was defeated in part by almost $1.6 million in foreign-backed funds contributed by the 1630 Fund. Kansas has an opportunity to close this foreign influence loophole. Foreign nationals are already prohibited from contributing to candidates, so why should organizations that oppose or support constitutional amendments be any different? I urge you to support House Bill 2106 to help stop foreign nationals from influencing Kansas. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Ms. Sutherland? Okay, awesome. Thank you very much. Our next conferee is Mr. Jason Sneed. Welcome to the committee, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jason Sneed. I'm the Executive Director of Honest Elections Project Action, which is an organization dedicated to advancing election integrity in all 50 states. I'm very pleased to be able to join you today and speak as a proponent for House Bill 2106, including the amendment language that you just heard. I think that we should start with a very simple proposition that all elections, whether we're talking about elections for candidates or for ballot issues, ought to be decided by the citizens of our country and by the voters of this state. As you have just heard from Secretary LaRose and from Caitlin Sutherland, there is a loophole in the law right now that is permitting foreign nationals to funnel vast amounts of money to influence highly influential campaigns that are amending our state constitutions, and these are, after all, the political DNA of our republic. So I think it is vital that we now act to close this loophole and ensure the integrity of the Kansas Constitution and future ballot measure questions that may be presented to the people by this body. I think that it would be a good idea to discuss some of the particulars of the amended language, in particular to understand why we need to take us in the direction that we are going. Obviously, this is a not quite as straightforward an issue in terms of solving the problem as it is talking about it. We've seen there are complex money flows that the folks like Hans-Jörg Wyss have been using to get their money into our politics. And we should also understand that what Mr. Wyss can do and the 1630 Fund can do, bad actors from places like China or Russia can do as well. And I think that we have to understand that there is functionally no difference between the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese private sector, and so it is hardly unfathomable to say that hostile foreign powers could leverage wealthy activists in their country to use their money to put their influence into our constitutional fights just as easily as Mr. Wyss could. So to that end, I applaud you for considering this piece of legislation to solve this problem. And I think that any effective solution to the foreign funding problem needs to do at least 4 things. First, it's important to ban both direct and indirect sources of foreign contributions. As Ms. Sutherland noted, we're not talking about, in just the case of Hans-Jörg Wyss, him giving directly to a campaign. We're talking about money being routed through intermediaries, so we need to make sure that we are cutting off indirect contributions as well as direct contributions. We also need to design the law in such a way as to prevent third-party groups from effectively being used to launder foreign contributions into the process. One of the easiest ways to do this is to take money from a foreign national, spend that money on something entirely unrelated to a ballot measure, and then free up resources to spend on ballot measure or constitutional amendment campaigns. So I think that one clear way to do this is exactly what's spelled out here, to simply say that donors to these campaigns have to certify both that they are not a foreign national and that they have not received more than, in this case, $100,000 over a 4-year period. That's a good and effective way to prevent that laundering. Second, I think it's important that we apply these protections to independent expenditure campaigns as well, because the last thing that we want to do is put up a firewall when it comes to those direct and indirect contributions to a campaign, but then make it possible for foreign nationals to pivot their spending to campaigns that come alongside as independent expenditure campaigns. Third, as this measure does, I think it's important to apply the ban broadly when we're talking about foreign nationals, not just governments or political parties, as many state laws do, but also to foreign individuals as well. Quite frankly, whether the money is coming from a foreign political party or a foreign government or simply a foreign billionaire who has decided he wants to interfere in our politics, that meddling is just as toxic regardless of the source. And then finally, I think that we should make clear that what this is a piece of legislation and a broader effort to protect the integrity of the American political process, not as a backdoor for donor disclosure or other efforts to undermine the privacy rights and the First Amendment rights of American citizens. We're interested in preserving the integrity of this process, not undermining it. With that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I certainly applaud the committee for the leadership that you're showing in closing this loophole at this very important time.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Do we have any questions for the conferee? Yeah, Representative Haskins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you for your testimony. And after listening to the last three, there seems to be a consistent player that we're keep referring to. And how do you pronounce his name again, the Swiss individual?
Hans-Jörg Wyss.
Yeah, that guy. And I understand the logic behind the bill, and I understand that you give an example, but I would like for this to be a little bit more bipartisan. And can you share how this is happening with someone that might be supporting the Republican Party? I mean, it seems like it's a rational bill, but the argument in defense is, well, the money went to the Democrats. And so is there a case that you may be able to share or help us out?
Well, this is the case that we have. It's one that organizations like Americans for Public Trust have been able to trace. It is certainly not the end-all, be-all. I'm sure that there are other instances where foreign money is getting into the political process. And I do agree with you, sir, that this should be really a nonpartisan, I don't even want to say bipartisan, this should be a nonpartisan issue. We are sort of forced to use the evidence that we have to kind of make the case. But I would be just as comfortable saying that no group on the right should be using foreign money to interfere in our political process as any group on the left.
And thank you, and that helps. And just for clarification, the last conference said that they were nonpartisan. Is your organization nonpartisan as well?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for the conferee? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm a person who reads a lot, but I never come across this, Mr. Vice. What is his business? I mean, where did he get all his money? And I mean, is there any story behind that?
Well, he is in the medical manufacturing business, medical device manufacturing business. He's a billionaire, so he's extremely wealthy. And for whatever particular reason, he has decided that without becoming a citizen, he wants to engage in American politics. He's given, so far as we know, about $500 million to political causes in this country, including $250 million to the intermediary group, the 1630 Fund, which is one of the largest donor entities to ballot measure fights all over the country.
One other question. So, does did he go to school in the U.S.? Does he have some special tie to the U.S., or he just he's just a political activist who just sees the U.S. as a potential soft target for his his ideas?
Well, I can't speak to his particular motives. He certainly paints himself as somebody who has fallen in love with our country, but I sort of personally question that since he never decided to become a citizen of the country. And again, whatever his particular motivations may be, unless you're willing to essentially put some skin in the game by at least becoming a permanent resident of this country, then I think that we should have a simple principle that foreign nationals should not be interfering with our elections. That rule applies to voting as easily as it does to something like this with influencing elections or ballot issue fights. And I know that you all are considering right now a constitutional amendment to ban non-citizens from voting. So there's, I think, quite a lot of history, including jurisprudence, that says that we can, and frankly, I would argue, should be drawing these lines between what citizens can do and what foreign nationals can do.
Are there any other questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation and the rest of the team today. Quick question, well, two, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Number one, do we have any video footage of this individual speaking? I know they're kind of shadowy and it's a very rat's nest of contributions that they do and connections and everything like that. Are they ever out in front speaking on the things that they want to do?
I believe that there is some. I would defer to Ms. Sutherland. She's got all the records and information pertaining to Mr. Vease. I do know that he prefers to be behind the scenes and does not like the fact, frankly, that there are so many people suddenly talking about his enormous political contributions.
Okay, so it sounds like this is an individual who may have wanted an American girlfriend, got turned down, and now he's a coward and won't come out of the shadows. Duly noted. The other question that I have for you could be as well, sir. When it comes to the contributions that are made, because this person and others like him work in the shadows, perhaps even on the other side of the aisle, per this legislation as you've seen it, or the others that you've seen in other states, is there a firm way of determining whether or not, even when it's reported, that contributions have been accepted?
Well, it depends on...
They know what they know.
Yeah, so as it's laid out here, a campaign would basically be required to ask a donor to affirm that they are not a foreign national and have not accepted more than $100,000. That really does put the onus on the individual who is making the donation. It's obviously very possible with any particular scheme that we're talking about that somebody who is intent on maliciously or nefariously engaging in political activism, they could lie on something like that. So there's no ironclad bulletproof approach here. But we think that this is a very, very good way to get that information, and I think it will deter a lot of bad actors, plus the enforcement mechanisms baked in here. You heard Secretary LaRose talk about how important it is on the enforcement side. Put some teeth behind this as well. So even folks that may want to bend the rules, I think would think twice when they see the damages that could be levied against them. And it's certainly the case that there are a lot of eyes on stuff like this. So you've got groups like mine, Americans for Public Trust on the outside, and others helping to watch this process.
Are there any other questions? I've got a couple, if you don't mind, Mr. Sneed. So the first one of the concerns I've heard about this legislation that I'd like you to address is concerns about revealing the donors to nonprofits. You know, the nonprofits, nonprofits do a lot of things, right? Not just politics. And I've heard some concerns that this might force those nonprofits to throw open the books, which might, infringe on the privacy of people who thought they were just contributing, to I don't know, animal cruelty or whatever, and all of a sudden all of their information's out there. Could you address that? I mean, for the folks that have those concerns?
Certainly. So I understand where the concern is coming from, and as I said in my testimony, I very adamantly share the passion for preserving donor privacy and the ability of American citizens to engage in those First Amendment rights. I don't see anything in here that puts those rights at risk. This is about ensuring that foreign nationals are not able to put money into the process, and quite frankly, the way that this would be put into place under the bill mirrors what, for instance, people already have to do do when they are donating to candidate campaigns and to PACs. So this really essentially just brings a lot of what we already see on, one side of the political ledger to this space. And when we were designing, for instance, we have a model bill on the website for my sister organization, Honest Elections Project. We consulted with campaign finance and First Amendment experts to make sure that when we're doing this, that we're going to have the impact that we want, and we're not going to put donor privacy at risk.
And one other question, we say, hey, foreign money is already illegal in candidate campaigns, but we've got this loophole with ballot, with amendment elections. But that amendment's not on the ballot by itself, right? That constitutional amendment's on the back of a ballot that on the front side has candidates. So if this foreign money is being used to turn out the vote for that constitutional amendment, isn't it also having an impact on all those candidate races on the other side?
Well, that's certainly the way that we've seen ballot measures used to drive turnout with a heavy influence on the outcome of candidate races. So I would argue that's another reason to do something like this, to help make sure that not only are you seeing the direct impact of foreign money by passing or defeating a particular measure that's been proposed by the legislature here, but also that you are preventing that money from, potentially indirectly impacting those candidate races. And as you all know, as it's your purview to recommend any amendment to the Constitution, that means that a foreign national under the system you have now could spend to, as they already did, defeat an abortion measure, but you could also be talking about something dealing with the election integrity laws, right? So the laws that govern the elections for candidates that a foreign national cannot give to, a foreign national could nonetheless put money in to influence the way elections run. And we've certainly seen the 1630 Fund in states all over the country put millions of dollars into those fights as well. So I see what you're saying about the impact there, and I would say that's yet another reason to ban foreign money and close this loophole.
Any other questions? Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. We know that there's a lot of issues with foreign interference relating to social media and ads of that nature, bots and things that pretend to be U.S. citizens or those, who may live in a community. Does this bill do anything about that aspect at all? Because that to me seems like a very serious issue, and this seems to be very limited to a certain very particular group that maybe you and others are not fond of, or the outcome. But I would say that my biggest concern would be the interference of foreign agents into social media and other websites like that.
Well, I think that this measure, while again we've been talking about one group as sort of the exemplar of how easy it is for foreign influence to interfere with this process, it applies to any individual, any foreign national, any campaign that wants to weigh in on a ballot measure. So it's much broader than just one group. As to the role of bots and things like that, I think this would be covered under this if it's part of a campaign relating to a ballot measure. But it may also be that some of the campaigns you're talking about are violating federal laws if they're trying to interfere with candidate elections and so forth. So there's lots of complexity there. But if it was a group that was trying to use something like that to influence the outcome of a constitutional amendment question, I think that would be covered under something like this as well if the originating source of the funds was a foreign national.
Could you tell me what that would look like in that case, if you have any idea, if any speculation whatsoever? Like, for instance, if we found out that there was some bot farm that was working under the influence of, a foreign government who was trying to undermine our election integrity, how would this bill or any bills that have been passed through other states affect that, and what would that look like?
Well, that's a hypothetical. It's a little difficult to answer because it would, I think, be very fact-dependent on the circumstances and so forth. But certainly the enforcement mechanisms that are laid out here, if there is a credible allegation that, for instance, a campaign or an independent expenditure campaign is being funded by a foreign government or a foreign entity. You know, your definition of foreign national under this is fairly broad. You could file a complaint, and then there could be an investigation with civil or possibly criminal penalties under the statute that is being considered here.
I think the reviser would like to jump in. Mr. Reviser?
I'm curious if any of the states have adopted criminal penalties associated with violations of these types of acts.
There are some states that have criminal penalties associated with this, but very few states have gone so far as to ban foreign nationals from giving directly to or indirectly to these particular types of campaigns. Ohio did last year and gave the Attorney General enforcement authority very similar to what you have here.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Sneed? Representative Penn for second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the second time. And I don't know if this is a question for you or perhaps it's for the reviser, sir. I know that we were considering to raise the limits of our political parties here, contribution limits here in the state of Kansas. There's a bill on the table for that. Would this particular piece of legislation apply to those political parties as well to make sure that when they receive any contributions that they have to delineate whether they've received them from foreign sources as well?
I believe it's already illegal for a foreign national to contribute to a political party, but I don't know that for a fact. Mr. Reviser?
I will check on that and get back.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Sneed? Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate your testimony today.
Thank you.
Our last conferee that I have listed for in-person testimony is Ms. Catherine Gonzalez. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's great to be with you all. I'm Catherine Gonzalez. I'm the Director of State Advocacy for Heritage Action for America. We are a grassroots organization, and we lobby on behalf of American people to advance policies in the states. We lobby across the states, but it's always great to be in my home state here in Kansas, so it's great to be with you all today. Heritage Action supports House Bill 2106. We also support the proposed amendments in front of you to strengthen the bill and would encourage those amendments to be included at the appropriate time. I won't rehash my written testimony. You have that before you, or what the other conferees have already covered. I just want to underscore a couple of points from our perspective. 2106 is a really strong, really great effort to make sure that Kansas voices are not diluted, that Kansans and U.S. citizens are the ones determining the state constitution. And so really applaud the committee for taking this up and Chairman Proctor for allowing this discussion today. Two, I want to underscore, as we talk with lawmakers even across the country on this issue, we like to underscore that this is not a hypothetical, as the other conferees have already covered today. And specifically for Kansas and our state, you know, $1.6 million is quite a big number to be dumped into the state, and that's just what we know about. And so wanted to underscore the spend here in the state and really underscore that, that Kansas really has an opportunity to lead this in the nation. Ohio, as already mentioned, has already banned this indirect and direct. And Kansas, as we look across the country, is really top of mind, and they're leading on even the timing of this bill. So I want to applaud that as well. And then I will just note something else just for the closing statement here. The grassroots and your constituents are really attentive to this issue. We lobby alongside of them, on behalf of them, and this is a top of mind issue for them. They were very engaged in Ohio and even here in Kansas as we work to protect their voice, and so I want to underscore that as well. In closing, and it's in my written testimony, I like to mention George Washington made a note in his 1796 farewell address that, quote, foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government, end quote. And so I applaud you all for taking action on this, especially with growing geopolitical threats like the Chinese Communist Party, as other conferees have already mentioned, for taking a really direct role in making sure that Kansas voices are protected. So I'll close with that and give some time back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any questions for Ms. Gonzalez? Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the for the testimony from Heritage Action. I am very curious as far as you know, the one gentleman who's got some notoriety here today, But as far as, I mean, does Heritage Action, you guys work all across the U.S., as far as, I mean, do you see this happening with, other what might be maybe more from adversarial nations as far as people who are extremely wealthy jumping in the same territory? Or is it, a little more limited to maybe the sort of, I don't know, European types like the Swiss billionaire fellow? Just, I don't know.
Yeah, so certainly, thank you for the question. Mr. Weiss is certainly the top individual of note here, and we see that across the country, right? 33 plus million in Michigan, Ohio, Florida, Missouri, a number of states, and states like Arkansas and Nebraska. So you're not alone here in Kansas and some of these states on the spend. So he is top of mind, I think, because we can track the receipts and see the money flowing. That said, there's an article out, actually, I think a headline from Fox News, I'm happy to send it to you, that shows, the CCP is starting to target energy ballot and issues and the like. And so we make a point often when we're talking across the country that so long as this loophole exists, there's nothing stopping a foreign adversary or others from taking advantage of that loophole and trying to change your state constitution. So that's kind of my answer right now, but I'm happy to follow up with more details.
My secondary question would be, of course, it has been noted that on just a raw political candidate level, this is already illegal. And the question would be, well, can we really stop this? Is this going to be effective? I guess my question would be on a candidate level, as far as just the regular, political action committees and such. I mean, do you see current federal law and state law being relatively effective in keeping foreign nationals and outside actors from actually, funneling money directly to campaigns?
Thank you. I believe the answer to that question is that federal law already prohibits this, so it is, effective in that respect, and I'll defer if I've misspoken there. And so, but I would note back, particularly on the ballot issue, effectiveness. We saw this in Ohio, as Secretary LaRose mentioned in his testimony, that the moment that this bill was, the special session was called, they 1630 fund, dumped their money and decided to go ahead and just keep spending. But the moment that it was enacted, they stopped spending. And we've seen the money actually stop flowing in the state from the 1630 fund as a direct result of that legislation. And so I think I'll come around to another way of answering your question. I think specifically when we're talking about these fights on constitutional amendments and ballot issues, the answer is absolutely this legislation can be effective in closing that loophole and making sure that these foreign dollars are not funneling into your state. And so it can be quite effective.
Any other questions for Ms. Gonzalez? Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. I understand you mentioned Fox News in this. A former conferee mentioned States Newsroom. Can you tell me, do you know how many foreign individuals have stock in Fox News or have any influence over that? It seems like, based on what I can see on who has part ownership in Fox News, they, along with other media corporations, may be susceptible to falling under this for being able to influence our elections through national media.
Thank you for the question. I do not know the answer to that question. I'm happy to follow up with you, but I don't know the answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just for the crowd watching outside here, this bill does not do anything with States Newsroom, and that was kind of a side discussion that occurred in here because this gentleman's also involved in funding that. But this, I want to make sure, I know you know this, but for the folks in the room or folks outside the room, we are not about to legislate who can spend money doing news in the state of Kansas, okay? We're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, so. Is there any other questions for Ms. Gonzalez? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony. I don't have anybody else listed as a in-person proponent. Does anybody else wish to speak in favor of House Bill 2106? Okay, seeing none, committee, I'll direct your attention to the written-only testimony from numerous people, and I will close proponent testimony. I have no one listed as neutral on this bill. Does anybody wish to speak as a neutral on House Bill 2106? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to opponents, and perhaps for the first time in the history of the Elections Committee, there are no opponents listed on this bill. Is there anybody wishing to speak as an opponent? Wow. Wow. Okay, I will close opponent testimony, and I will close the hearing on House Bill 2106. Committee, our next order of business, we have two meetings minutes to approve. January 28th and January 30th the committee assistant has sent those out. The chair would entertain a motion on those minutes. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that these minutes are amazing, and I think that we should go ahead and get them approved. I would make that motion.
I agree that they're amazing, and I appreciate the second from the ranking minority member. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes for January 28th and January 30th signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The minutes are approved. Committee, since we've got a little bit of time left, I would like to work some bills here. The first bill that I'd like to work is House Bill 2018. So while the revisor is handing out an amendment, does anybody have a motion on House Bill 2018? For the purposes of discussion, perhaps. Representative Penn beat Representative Sutton. Representative Penn.
Well, Mr. Chairman, not for purposes of discussion, but definitely to move it out of committee, I move that we get House Bill 2018 moved out of the committee favorably.
Okay. Do I have a second? I have a second from Representative Sutton and a first. All right. Is there any discussion on House Bill 2018? I have an amendment to begin with. So did everybody get the amendment? Okay, so committee, when I was speaking to the clerks last week at their day in the Capitol, several of them mentioned to me that they're having problems across the board with getting election officer or election workers. One of them told me a story. Their deputy clerk is from another county, and so that person can't help them like touch ballots because they're from another county and they can't by statute be an election worker. And so they asked me when I talked to them about this bill to not only highlight that the military service member or dependent should reside in the state of Kansas at the time of the election, but also open up all election workers to be anywhere in the state of Kansas so that they can borrow from other counties, or people that work in their office in one county but live in another county can still participate. So what this amendment does primarily is open it up so that election officers or election workers, as long as they live in the state of Kansas, whether they're military or dependents or not, are eligible to be election workers. The other thing this does is, per Mr. Barker's request during his testimony, we've removed Secretary of State because they have nothing to do with the hiring or firing of election workers. Are there any questions on the amendment? Okay, Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious if you can give an explanation on the attachment A on the back and what changes to the bill are we looking at?
Mr. Revisor, would you like to take a crack at that?
As the chairman explained, this is the a statute that deals with the qualifications for election workers, and if we made the changes in the new section that just applies to the military and family and so on. And the suggestion was that we go into the election statutes that deal specifically with everybody else. And this is, so we've made the same change in that statute.
And I did fail to mention that we also, because the last time we ran this bill, we had forgotten to put that the election worker needed to be a citizen of the United States. So we also added that in this. I forgot to mention that when I explained the amendment. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question, Mr. Chairman. Is there any concern from those who would say, hey, their election workers need to be from their area so that you don't get a flood of, and since we're keeping it within the confines of Kansas, a flood of individuals from another region, another city that may play nefariously in their particular readout of election results?
And, that was the kind of concern that we talked about in the hearing.
Because, those Wichita guys, they're kind of nasty, yeah.
At the end of the day, it's up to the election officer whether they hire or don't hire somebody. And in all but four counties in the state, it's an elected official. So they're accountable to the people. So rather, because we talked in the hearing, is it going to be adjacent counties? Is it going to be, we just decided to put state of Kansas and leave it to the will of the people through their elected representative.
Okay, so my understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that they shall be a citizen of the United States. They shall live within the state of Kansas, and those authorities who are the hiring or firing managers may utilize this.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain Section D that has been striked out in Attachment A? Is that striking out the ability for them to vote by advance ballot or in advance at a polling place, or to leave for a break to exercise their right to vote at their own polling place? Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Revisor.
I believe that's just cleanup, actually.
So where would the provision allowing those circumstances be listed in the rest of it?
Well, I think what it does is it says that if you're an election judge or clerk, you get time off to go vote in the voting place where you normally would vote. It seemed to me like that was logical, and they didn't need to have specific authority to do it, but if you want to put it back in, you can.
The researcher would like Ms. Jillian Block.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is Jillian Block with Legislative Research. So I've actually attended a few poll worker trainings, and it's common practice among county clerks to instruct their poll workers to go and vote early, because an election shift is generally either the entire 14-hour day, and so they cannot go and vote at their precinct, or it's going to be that first half or the second half of the day. And so it's not always an option for them to go do that, and so they are encouraged to vote ahead of time.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Would this prevent or put anything in place to have the judge who's at the location prevent the individual? Let's say they weren't able to vote early, but they still want to exercise their right and need to leave for half an hour to go vote at their polling place. Does removing this prevent them from being protected, their right to vote on election day being protected so that they can do that? That's where my concern is. Otherwise, it seems like a pretty decent amendment, but I just want to make sure that we're still protecting our poll workers' rights and not accidentally, just trying to clean up language and accidentally not providing that provision for them.
I'm not, I don't think it's substantive to the change that we're trying to make that we strike this, so I would be willing to leave that in
I would really appreciate that. I just don't want to accidentally mess anything up when we're trying to fix something. So.
Okay. Since I haven't already made a motion on this amendment, I just shouted gleefully, I have an amendment. I would move that we pass this amendment except for the deletion of that subsection D in the attachment. Do I have a second? Okay, second from Representative Meyer. Is there any more discussion on the amendment? Okay, then I will close on my motion. All those in favor of amending signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. We're back on the bill. Is there any more discussion on the bill? Okay, seeing none. Representative Penn, would you like to renew your motion as amended?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we pass out House Bill 2018 out of committee, as amended, out of committee favorably for passage. Thank you.
Would you like to renew your first or second?
I would like to renew both.
Okay, all right. All those in favor? You've heard the motion to pass House Bill 2018 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed favorably out of the committee. Committee, since we have time, I would also like to look at House Bill 2021. Mr. Revisor, could you give us a brief overview? All right. Chair would entertain a motion on this bill. 2021. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we pass House Bill 2021 favorably for passage.
Do I have a second? I have a second. All right. Is there any discussion? So I just say we passed this bill unanimously at least once, maybe twice out of the House, and I'm hoping that three's a charm. Is there any other discussion?
Just since I don't have the bill right in front of me, it turns the Secretary of State's office, or Secretary of State would have the authority to write up regulations for remote ballot boxes, and he would have to, if we pass the bill and the House and Senate concur and the governor signs it, how quickly will the Secretary of State have that prepared? Is it mentioned? I don't know if it, point of clarification.
It's at least 6-month process, probably more.
There's no timeline requirement to establish regulations. It simply gives them the authority. But yeah, based on how long it took to get the regulation on paper ballot auditing, we're probably looking at 2026 by the time it gets published. Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have necessarily an issue other than the way that the bill is written on line 6, section 1, on or before January 1st, 2026, Secretary of State. So it implies like this is the only time that they will do it. Are we just wanting them to have rules and then expect them to update it on their own accord, or are these the rules? I've always been bothered by that.
It's merely a timeline where they have to adopt the rules and regulations. They can change them for good reason. I mean, rules are changed, but they would have to go through the process, which the process requires public comment and so on.
Thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other discussion on House Bill 2021? Okay, seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Did you have Further comment? Okay, we had a motion and a second to pass House Bill 2021 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed favorably. All right, one more, and we will be all caught up. The final bill is House Bill 2054. The chair would entertain a motion on that bill. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that House Bill 2054 be passed favorably for passage.
Okay, do I have a second? A second from Representative Penn. Mr. Advisor, can you remind us what that bill is about?
The bill doubles, as I recall, the campaign finance limitations for governor, lieutenant governor, and on, basically all the elected officials that are covered by the Campaign Finance Act.
It also removes the limits on parties, correct?
It does remove the limits on parties, right? Section, page 2, subsection D is stricken, which now limits the party committees to not to exceed 15,000 and political committees not to exceed 5, and then 25 and 10. So those limits are gone.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Representative Miller, you look like you're forming a thought.
Thank you for recognizing that, Mr. Chairman. I guess I remember there being discussion about PACs and the difference between the party limitation, the PAC limitation. The PACs are not limited in any way, either way, right? Currently?
Currently,
okay.
Yeah.
So this would just align the party donation capabilities with PACs.
And I believe the intent is, to weaken the power of PACs by giving political parties the same ability to raise money. Because a lot of times people, they max out the party and then they go straight to the PAC with the rest of the cash. So.
That does clear it up for me. Thank you.
And for purpose of discussion, someone who's very smart on this, that does a lot of legal work on campaign finance law, said something to me that stuck with me. There's going to be the same amount of money in the political process. This is people are going to spend the same amount. It's how transparent that's going to be. If it goes to PAC, you have no idea who's giving and how much. If it stays in candidate committees and in party committees, you at least have visibility on who's contributing to the process. So there's going to be the same amount of money either way. This way, at least we know who's spending. Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On that, for just discussion, do you think there will be a chilling effect if you now have to take those same checks and put them in a report, and maybe they won't come?
I mean, that's possible, but I imagine that people that want to hide their money are still going to give to the PAC instead of giving to the party. But that is a possibility, I guess. But, I don't know. That's a good question. But I imagine that most people that are giving to PACs now, they're giving because they've maxed out on their reported contributions to candidates or parties.
Okay, so this is giving them an opportunity to go a little bit higher if they had that ability to do so.
And keeping it visible, right? Because if it's going to the party, it gets reported.
Okay.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Point of clarification. On my memory from the testimony was that the last time Kansas law was changed, or the existing $500 limits and such, was that from the 1980s? Was it 89? And that adjusted for inflation, that even going up, even doubling it, just doesn't even hit inflation rate.
They said for $500 and from 1989 in today's dollars is $1,250, so we're not even keeping. And I know there was a discussion and some recommendation from some conferees about indexing this to inflation so it goes up automatically. I think that's problematic because nobody ever knows what the number is, right? You got to have an abacus to figure out how much money you're allowed to take from, individuals. So I figure we'll double it here and then in another 30 or 40 years or however long before we're able to address it again, we'll take another look at it. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a lot. So I just want to check, is there a limit on how much the each party can give a candidate, or is that endless? Like, is it the same? I'm trying to follow this, but some of the language here gets me a little confused, and I'd love to hear an explanation that could unconfuse that for me.
I will defer to the revisor if I'm saying this wrong, but it's my understanding that there's never been a limit on how much a party can give to an individual candidate.
Yeah, that was my understanding, but I just didn't know if maybe we would add some guardrails in there, because it seems like a party could give somebody $1 billion if they wanted, and we don't necessarily know all the time where that's coming from either.
Does your party have that much money?
No.
I may switch.
Oh, I'm sorry. The ranking would like me to be quiet. No, I kid. But no, I'm just, it seems like we're trying to do a good thing here in a lot of ways, but also I want to make sure that there are guardrails and protections in place so that we don't have something lopsided, or maybe, an individual who is now a naturalized citizen isn't throwing $1 billion into a state party in order to influence an election, if you know what I mean.
I take your point. I would point to the testimony of several of the conferees, including the dean from Washburn, whose name I'm embarrassed. Dean. Yes, Dean. If you're imposing campaign finance limits in order to avoid the appearance of impropriety, of quid pro quo, that's an acceptable reason. If you're establishing campaign finance limits because you think there's too much money in politics, that's infringing on speech, and it's unconstitutional. And so I don't, and the argument was for unlimited money from the parties to candidates that, I think everybody accepts that candidates are influenced by the parties. So and so that would be my counter argument. My other counter argument would be the example where, it's a filing deadline, the candidate that everybody thought was going to run, tragically passes away or has some health issue and has to drop out, and the party has to get somebody in the race right now. That might be a situation where you would be hamstringing one side if they weren't able to give that guy a bump to help him be competitive.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Representative Penn.
It's a quick one, Mr. Chairman. Is there any room in here for a sunset? Is it advisable? Just want to open that to discussion as well for review on it.
Well, the last campaign finance limits lasted 44 years or 45 years. So yeah, no, I'd entertain it for discussion, but I don't know that.
Well, and I'm with you on that. It seems to have, it has some longevity to it, but I didn't know if, going to the representative's question, if there's an opportunity for us maybe 4 or 5 years down the line to take a look at this again and do another assessment. And do that on a regular.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wouldn't, I don't mind that idea. I wouldn't probably phrase it as a sunset, because then if nothing is done, we revert back, which would be awkward along the way there. We could, if it was a strong feeling, we could put in there that this will be revisited every 10 years or 4 years or whatever, but we can't bind future legislators from actually doing that. We can't commit them. So I'm not sure if it would achieve what we want to achieve. That would be my thought, but it can go either way.
So I think Representative Berquist and then Representative Williams.
Not that this minimizes that concern, but our neighbors to the east have no limits at all in Missouri. And that doesn't mean that we should have no limits or that we should not care. But we are not extreme, and the political world around us is some of it's moving a little faster than we are. We like the speed of Kansas, but I don't think this is a big concern. I think it's minimal for the amount of time it's been since I was a kid. Even I was a kid.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just agree that we should leave it to the will of future bodies on this particular issue. However, when it comes to money and economic incentives, always sunsets.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd say is there is a urgency to this. We heard from the researchers that Alaska has currently no limits because their limits, which are the same as ours, were ruled unconstitutional by the Ninth Circuit. I know that there's a case right now. Mr. Keating told us over email after his testimony that he's participating in a case challenging Colorado's limits, which are unconstitutionally low, and that decision would apply to us. And so we can either do it or we can have the courts do it for us. So, Mr. Ranking Minority Member.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You did well. It's been a long day. And this is just a comment on working this, is going back to supporting the colleague, I do think that the big question is, I don't have any problems necessarily increasing the rates. It's time to do that. The big question is what will the elimination of limits for the parties, what role would that play? And I don't have an answer. I just think that it will be a point in time where we can go back and say, okay, this was a good idea, this was a bad idea. So putting a limit for them to come back and revisit may not be out of line on that, but I'll defer to the will of the committee on this one.
All right, and this will go to the floor. This isn't the final bite at the apple. If somebody brings an amendment, we'll debate it on the floor and see where we get to. Is there any more discussion? Okay, seeing none, who made the motion? Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman, do you move your motion?
Okay. I move House Bill 2054.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor of passing House Bill 2054 favorably signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. Committee, I'm all out of bills, so I give you back the gift of time. Is there anything for the good of the order?
If this was insurance, we would be talking, sir.
All right. On that note, we are adjourned.